If we think of all God's interactions with humanity as a book, how do you think we might go about reading that book? Maybe studying that book? It wouldn't be a book that would fit easily on a shelf or give many of the answers we're looking for in a Google search. We do have this book, the Bible, which admittedly can be put on a shelf, though I don't recommend it. Much better to keep it in your hands and in your heart. But even this book, well, it's complex. Learning how to read it, to find within its pages the story of God's relationship with humanity and all creation. Well, that's more than the work of a lifetime. But this is not the only book. There is a long Christian tradition of speaking of two books. This one and the book of creation. If God is creator, then we can learn about God from creation, just like we learn about an artist by enjoying their artwork. Psalm 19 is about those two books. It starts with the story that is told by creation. Look up at the sky. Can't you see God's glory? Can't you see the vastness of God's work? This poem was written in the Middle East, but here in Australia, this is the best place to read it because in our outback we have the best sky in the whole world. Have you ever been to the middle of Australia and just looked up at night? Is it even possible to do that and not know yourself to be a very tiny part of something absolutely enormous, beyond your capacity to even begin to comprehend? Just look at the sky. And look at the cycles of life, day, night, spring, summer, autumn, winter. Don't you see God's listening and responding to the needs of the moment and to the overall consistency of God's eternal, changeless nature? Of course, the cosmos doesn't use human words, but some truths are better delivered without words. So, the first section of this poem celebrates the way God can be known through God's creation. Now, there has been a thread in Christian history going back to the treatment of an astronomer called Galileo at a time when the church was at a very low point spiritually, a thread of history that suggests that Christians are in conflict with science. Which is a bizarre idea. But the thread is there. I can't deny it is there. And it is experiencing a resurgence today. But it is not the main fabric of Christian history. The main fabric is in line with Psalm 19. Christians believe that by studying creation, as scientists do, we can learn about our Creator. All truth is God's truth. How could it be otherwise? There is no truth in which God is not to be discerned. So, scientists are our partners as we seek to know God. I'm not saying they always get it right, but, any more than we do. It is, in fact, in the nature of scientific investigation to be dissatisfied with received knowledge and to keep seeking better and better answers. Scientists don't reach a conclusion and then stop thinking, not if they're good scientists. And perhaps Christians might sometimes need to do a little better at following the example of scientists. The truth about God is so vast that none of us should ever be satisfied with our conclusions. We never reach a point where we can stop thinking, stop exploring, stop asking questions. So we're looking up into the sky and we see this big, beautiful sun that the poet says comes out like a bridegroom from his wedding canopy. Now, that might not be an image that does much for you, but what the poem is doing here is actually clever. A lot of the cultures around the ancient Israelites worshipped the sun and other elements of creation. The poet has taken language for this poem from language that was used in the worship of the sun god, the Egyptian sun god Aten, and has used it for worshipping Yahweh, the Israelite God. Think about that for a moment. How comfortable are you? Would you be with incorporating what is good and true about other religions of our day? Psalm 19 says, look at that sun, so full of warmth and light, so consistent. There it is every day. Wow, the sun is fantastic. God put it there. Isn't God amazing? The poet stands in awe of creation just as much as those other cultures, but resists the impulse to worship creation. This, again, is a balance that Christians have not always maintained well. And again, history sometimes paints us in harsher tones than we necessarily deserve, but we have sometimes deserved very harsh tones indeed. Through the dark, greedy years of empire, when England, Spain and France had discovered just how small the world was and how quickly they must claim it for themselves before the others got their hands on it, there were Christians who went along for the ride, somehow thinking that the violent overthrow of nations could be an opportunity to spread the gospel. By doing that, they gave the impression that ravenous exploitation of this planet's resources is something that Christians endorse, something that God endorses. But it isn't. Just like completely annihilating other cultures is not a thing that Christians endorse. We've just seen how this poem has taken poetry from another religion and celebrated and used it in worshipping Yahweh. We stand in awe of creation and treat it with reverence and respect because it is the work of God in which God can be known. But we don't worship it. Like humans, the world around us is the creation of God, and it is not God. Therefore, like humans, it is vulnerable and in need of love. And love is the basis for the law in Israelite and Christian thought. And so, the poet moves from the light of light of the sun to the light of the law of the Lord. That is what God has revealed in actual words. 10 words to start with. All the other laws are examples, are workings out of how these 10 words might be applied in specific circumstances. And of course, our specific circumstances are so very, very different from those of several millennia ago that we do well to focus on the 10, the original ones. It might seem strange to think of the law being more desirable than gold, sweeter than honey, as the psalmist says. We don't usually think about the law that way, but that's because we are used to thinking about the law in relation to punishment. Our legal system trains us to think like that. We go to the shops and we see something we would really love to own. Let's say a watch. But we can't afford it. And we feel very sad, and that our lives will be empty from now on because we don't have that watch. But we don't just pick it up and walk out of the store without paying for it because we don't want to go to prison. fear of punishment makes law-abiding citizens out of the worst of us. But imagine a world in which nobody stole, ever. Not because they were afraid of punishment, but because everybody respected everybody else and wouldn't even think of taking something that belonged to someone else. Wouldn't that be a fabulous world? Isn't the idea of a world like that sweet? Sweeter than honey. Open up your Bibles to Exodus 20, 1 to 17. Feel free to pause me for a moment while you do that. Read through those verses and imagine, which bring to us the 10 words, sometimes called the 10 Commandments. But read through the 10 words and imagine a nation where everyone keeps all of them. No adultery, no violence, no lying in court. Probably no court. Why would you need a court? No abuse of spiritual authority, no neglect of the elderly. Wouldn't that be an excellent nation? Because the law is good. And as you look through that list, is there one word out of the 10 that catches your attention in particular and gets you just longing for a better world? For me, and this is probably because I'm from a big family, I have lots and lots of siblings, for me it is the last one. Don't envy. And I really do think that last one is in some ways a summation, a summary of all of them. Envy is so often the thing that leads us into all sorts of other wrongdoing. Imagine a world where there is no envy, where we are all absolutely delighted when other people do well, even when they do better than us, even when they get that thing that we most wanted. Competition is so much part of our world. It's kind of the basis of capitalism, and we are becoming more and more aware of just how much damage has been done to people and to creation in the name of capitalism and in the cause of competition. Imagine all the things that would change if there was no longer any competition. No need to do better than others, no pushing others out of the way in order to get ahead, just everyone doing the best they can and cheering everyone else on. Just imagine. Wouldn't that be fabulous? Wouldn't it be sweet? Sweeter than honey. There never has been a nation that has fully kept the 10 Commandments, or the 10 words, but there has been an individual. When we look at the life of Jesus, we see what it looks like for someone to live that way. And one thing we notice is that he suffered greatly. Those words were given to a nation because they work best when everybody is doing them. When one person lives out the 10 words and everyone else around them doesn't, that person is going to suffer, as Jesus did. Living this way is no guarantee of success or prosperity for an individual. But look how much life and light and hope came into the world because Jesus did live that way. At the start of the Gospel of John, Jesus is called the Word. Now, there's so much meaning in that, so many different things that it means. But one thing I think pretty much definitely means is that what the 10 words were to the ancient Israelites, Jesus is for the whole world. Jesus embodies the law. For us, he is the law. All those beautiful things that Psalm 19 tells us about the law are true of Jesus. Jesus is most certainly sweeter than honey. In fact, all the structures on which the ancient Israelite society was built are embodied in Jesus: law, wisdom, prophecy, and temple. In the 1 Corinthians reading for today, Paul speaks of Jesus being the wisdom of God and the power of God. He embodies in himself the role of sage and prophet. The law, the sage, the prophet, and John 2 tells us, the temple. Tear down the temple and in 3 days I will rebuild it, Jesus said, speaking of his body. All the things that were given to the ancient Israelites to support them in their calling to bless the world come together in Jesus. He recapitulates or retells and plays out again the whole story of God's dealing with humanity up until that point. Or not even just up until that point. The whole story is recapitulated in Jesus. The entire story is retold in Jesus in conclusion that was always intended. When we study human history, it is easy to get depressed. Especially at the moment, I think. We see the same mistakes made again and again. We think we should have learned, but then, there we go again. We see power being abused and people being exploited in the same ways, again and again, just with different technology each time, and therefore with more and more devastating outcomes each time. It is easy to believe that the human race is caught up in a spiral, and not an upward spiral either, but a downward one. And that is scary, especially as we see the movement of history picking up speed. Our younger people see it and are frightened about where the whirlwind of history might carry us. But in the middle of the story, God entered the whirlwind in the person of Jesus and created a still point in history in which the human race does it right, fulfills our destiny completely and fully. And Jesus calls us into that still point with him, to love with his courage and his faith and his compassion, rather than picking up and amplifying the anxiety around us. Our destiny is not determined by where we seem to be headed in time. Our destiny is embodied in Jesus, who is humanity, mature and perfect, revealed not at the end, but in the middle of history. That is how the story of God and humanity is to be read. In him, we can also be a still point in our anxious world, announcing that human destiny is not destruction. The destiny of creation is not destruction, but life beyond our imagining. Amen.